a framework of lower-dimensional causality in Cartesian space, the finite breath and its true scale of perception. This discussion presents a framework integrating lower-dimensional causality within a four-dimensional constraint space, reflecting an emergent reciprocity between matter, time, and perception. Traditional conceptions of homogeneous space-time fail to account for nuanced perceptual scales and localized phenomena. We explore a model in which matter-energy distributions dynamically shape temporal perception, proposing the metaphor finite breath to encapsulate the interplay between human-scale experience and universal space-time dynamics. Our breath may be fleeting in its biological function, yet its impact extends beyond the moment of exhalation. Each breath enters a vast atmospheric circulation, a system without a clear beginning or end, reinforcing the notion that even finite actions persist within larger relational structures. Intellectually, breath carries ideas, speech, and expression, elements that propagate through perception, memory, and interaction. But does this continuation unfold linearly, or is it shaped by lower-dimensional constraints that govern how influence takes form? By integrating lower-dimensional causality in Cartesian space, we move beyond a simple past-to-future timeline of influence. Instead, we recognize that breath, like physical transformations, follows a spatially constrained resolution, where its effects arise not from indefinite forward motion, but from the structural limitations imposed by the environment it enters. Breath neither persists indefinitely nor vanishes instantly. Its impact is defined by relational constraints, much like how one-dimensional and two-dimensional structures shape causality within three-dimensional space. Breath, in its simplest form, follows one-dimensional causality. It is exhaled, moves outward, and dissipates. However, when it carries speech, expression, or thought, it follows a more structured path, shaped by relational constraints that determine how it propagates and is received. A single exhalation follows a direct, unidirectional trajectory akin to classical determinism, an action leading to an effect with minimal interference. When breath carries meaning, through language, tone, or artistic expression, it enters an interactive field where influence does not simply propagate outward but expands non-linearly. Influence is shaped by overlapping constraints, where feedback, interpretation, and interaction form a dynamic network of propagation. Once spoken or recorded, ideas do not persist as isolated emissions but integrate into a structured cognitive and perceptual field. Breath, now as a structured phenomenon, continues only in ways aligned with the constraints of its environment. Just as lower-dimensional structures shape transformations in Cartesian space, influence is not measured in persistence or decay alone, but in constraint-driven resolution within the systems it interacts with. The global atmosphere as a continuous, interacting system serves as an analogy for how breath integrates into larger structures. Every exhalation physically disperses, yet the air we breathe today contains remnants of breaths taken centuries ago. However, while the physical presence of breath persists, its perceptual impact is determined by lower-dimensional constraints that shape how information propagates. Speech, carried on breath, is not just movement but a structuring of air into a meaningful form. The influence of breath is not uniform, but shaped by how air is structured to carry intentionality and perception. Just as four-dimensional space in Cartesian geometry can be a holographic encoding of three-dimensional constraints, the atmosphere itself functions as a memory structure. Past emissions do not vanish, but become relationally integrated into new configurations, altering how they persist. Breath does not persist in an unaltered state, but undergoes structured transformation as it interacts with environmental and cognitive constraints. The persistence of breath is not merely a matter of time, but of how the surrounding environment reshapes and integrates its influence. Reception and integration depend on context, interpretation, and cognitive framework, meaning breath's influence is neither static nor singular. Breath, therefore, does not advance through time as an independent force, but instead resolves through the spatial constraints that govern its transformation, just as lower dimensional causality determines change within Cartesian space. If four-dimensional space in Cartesian geometry is not an additional spatial dimension, but an emergent holographic encoding of three-dimensional constraints, we can extend this understanding to how breath-based influence is encoded in perception. Once spoken, breath no longer moves forward in time, but remains encoded within a network of interactions, shaped by limitations on how it can be perceived and recalled. Just as holographic theory suggests that higher dimensional space is encoded within lower dimensional boundaries, breath's influence is not infinite. It persists within the structured limits of interaction and memory. This refinement does not assume endless reach, but instead recognizes that breath follows an encoded trajectory through the constraints that shape its reception and transformation. Breath is neither permanent nor instantly lost. Its scale of influence is neither infinite nor negligible. It is determined by the constraints that govern how it propagates, is received, and is transformed. Lower dimensional causality structures its impact, meaning breath does not move forward indefinitely, but instead resolves within the spatial limits of its environment. The atmosphere, like a four-dimensional constraint space, encodes past emissions. Breath is physically persistent but relationally structured. Influence is not measured in duration but in structured transformation, where a finite act integrates into a larger constraint-driven spatial network. Thus, rather than viewing breath as either enduring forever or vanishing instantly, we recognize it as a structured transition, governed not by time-driven causality, but by constraint-based resolution within a relational framework. Breath is not a force of endless reach, but a transition through perception and structure, shaping reality in ways that are neither final nor immeasurable, only relationally determined.